welcome back
What's
to
up?
episode 3 of tonight's stream of the A to G Lifestyle podcast here on YouTube and Twitch. We're live on 2 platforms tonight. Somehow we found a way to finesse that, and I think it's gone well so far. The first episode went well. We had good discussion about Andrew Tate. If you haven't checked that one out yet, go ahead and do so after watching this live, or if you're listening to this post-recording, go ahead and check that out. It should be just below this on whatever app you're listening to, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the whole shebang. But anyway, I already asked Andreas how he was doing earlier before the other stream. Gavin, how are you doing tonight?
Oh, dude, I'm doing fantastic. It's been a good day.
It's a good day.
Is Gavin frozen?
Gavin does look a little bit freezy.
Do you want to exit and come back in, Gavin? Because you look like you're frozen.
Yeah, I got you.
Well, anyway, that was Gavin, ladies and gentlemen. Gavin is gone. He'll be hopping back in a second. But yeah.
But to talk about that previous episode, I thought that went great. You should definitely check it out. We had a guest come on towards the end there that had a lot more context than we did, and I thought that was valuable knowledge. And I thought that was great. You should check it out. It was a good time. We discussed Andrew Tate and his most recent escapades. So if you have time, check that out. In our first episode, if you haven't seen that yet, we talked about the Ukraine or however you're supposed to say it in the political correct way, because you say the Ukraine, some people get mad. If you say Ukraine, other people get mad.
No.
You should check that out. That was also a good discussion. So, and we hope to be putting up a video every Saturday, but these first few Saturdays of 2023, we'll be putting up 2 episodes of this podcast. So check them both out. I don't know what we're talking about next week. I think it's probably going to be the Dobbs decision in the United States. I think that's what we're talking about. I don't know for sure. We'll talk about that, and we haven't decided what our current topic is, but you should check that out next week. It'll be a grand time.
Big topics upcoming, ladies and gentlemen. You do not want to miss a second of it. And if I already haven't given you the social media shout out for this episode yet, go ahead and follow us on social media at AG Lifestyle Pod on all social medias. Like I said in the previous episode 2, we don't really use them yet, but if you want to send us a message, that's certainly a way you can do it, aside from just sending us an email at aglifestylepod@gmail.com. If you want to go follow me, I guess, because Andreas over here is such a good citizen and chap that he stays away from the public discourse of social media besides using Twitter. I know. Can you imagine this? It's the 21st century, man. You got to get with the program. But yeah, you can go follow him on Twitter. I'm sure. I don't know what his Twitter handle is. I don't really use Twitter. But you can follow me on Instagram.
I don't post often.
Oh, okay, fair enough. That would make sense. Never mind. Don't go follow him on Twitter. He won't get back to you. And that's not the image that we want to portray on the podcast yet. Not yet. But you can go follow me on Instagram at Chris II. That is a place where I do post a lot of content related stuff on my story. If you want to keep up to date with that, that's probably going to be the most active of our social medias recently. Is Gavin still frozen?
I don't know. Gavin, are you frozen? Can you frozen? Raise your hands, or you're just blurry? It's okay.
You're just blurry?
Yeah, you're just blurry. Hopefully the internet fixes itself.
Say something.
Me and
Chris
are
say something.
I'm here. Can you guys hear me?
There we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
I'm just not moving a whole lot. I'm just kind of.
Yeah.
Oh, you're just kind of still.
Shout out to the chat.
Yes, shout out to the chat indeed. The chat was super instrumental in our last stream. We met a new friend. What was his name? Cup?
I think Rare Cup.
Rare Cup. Yes, Rare Cup. Shout out to Rare Cup. He said he would drop by this stream too. So hopefully he drops back in and joins our conversation on our topic of the day. But I think we're ready to go. We're ready to hop into it, gentlemen.
Yeah. Chris, you want to kick us off on Uvalde?
Oh, most certainly. So the issue of the Uvalde shooting. On May 24th, 2022, a mass school shooting occurred at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Effectively, an 18-year-old named Salvador Ramos fatally shot 19 students and 2 teachers while injuring 17 others. It was the 3rd deadliest school shooting in the United States, I believe, outside of the 2007 Virginia Tech shooting and the 2012 Sandy Hook shooting. Effectively, what happened is that Ramos fired shots outside of the school for 5 minutes before entering completely unobstructed through a side door that was unlocked. Police who responded to the incident initially waited more than an hour, 60 minutes before engaging Ramos on their own. And one of the issues with this is that the Uvalde School District PD, first off, it was Uvalde. There's a little police department in the Uvalde area that was the initial response team. So it wasn't a Uvalde PD initially. It was Uvalde's, I think it's like their municipal little school district PD. It's a very small department, but they were initially the first team on the scene. And their police chief, Pedro Arredondo, was fired shortly after attempting to justify his decision-making in leading the incident response team in this particular event. But effectively, what Arredondo, and this is actually one of the more critical decisions that he made that might have changed the outcome here, is that he initially ruled the event a barricaded subject situation, because when police decided to go in, apparently Ramos was barricaded between classrooms of some sort. So effectively, it was a barricaded suspect situation. Unfortunately, he should have deemed it an active shooter situation, which would have made the approach just a little bit different. And that definitely frustrated a few people, to say the least. Also, the inaccurate reports of the timeline and police action further complicated the matters in the issue for the public and in the public's opinion. And in response to the shooting, Congress passed a law that was then signed by President Joe Biden, which was the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was the most significant gun legislation since the 1994 federal assault weapons ban. As a result of the shooting, the elementary school was permanently closed and will be demolished sometime in the near future. I'm going to open it up to you guys, though. What do you guys initially think about the whole Uvalde shooting?
Gavin?
I was going to say you, Andreas. You have more details than I do. Let's get more of those out first.
Sure. So Uvalde, the big thing about the Uvalde shooting is that it just took a long time between when the shooting began and they actually stopped the shooter. It was over an hour it took before, the police actually came in and stopped the threat, which, that's quite significant. You had police standing there for 40 minutes longer soon as they arrived, doing almost nothing, waiting for keys to get into a classroom, which is what they claiming that they needed to get more equipment to go in, getting a fire axe in order to break down the door, and they never checked the doors to make sure they were unlocked, which is, a huge failing. And it was just a complete failure on part of the Uvalde Police Department and the Texas Rangers that were there, and all of the other police agencies that ended up showing up over this hour-plus event. And some people may be asking, well, why why did that happen this way? Why did people just stand there while people were being killed, while people were receiving text messages that people were getting killed, and the police were just standing there not doing anything? And that majorly comes down to United States decisions that they've had about the role of the police in the United States. We have 3 significant Supreme Court cases that discuss the duties of police here in the United States when it comes to these issues. You first got Castle Rock v. Gonzalez, a case where the police were shown that they didn't have a duty, right, to prevent a violent act from occurring, and that there was no, and that it didn't violate the due process clause, right, when police didn't do anything to stop a murder, right? In this case, a woman by Jessica Gonzalez had a restraining order against her estranged husband, right? And in that order, it prevented the husband from seeing Gonzalez or their 3 daughters. And then Gonzalez abducted these 3 daughters, right? And then Jessica, urged the police to go and arrest her husband because he kidnapped her kids, right? This guy has been prevented from seeing the kids by a court order saying you shouldn't see the kids, it's not allowed. And then Jessica says, hey, court, he took the kids, he abducted them, he kidnapped them. And then the police didn't do anything. And if I'm not mistaken here, let me scroll down on this Supreme Court case because I actually have it pulled up. Let's see here. They didn't enforce the restraining order, and I believe he killed the 3 kids and himself.
Wow.
Right? And the Supreme Court said that her due process rights were not violated because the police have no duty to protect her children, or even though there's a court order. So we see a similar thing happened here in Uvalde, where these police officers, they don't actually have a duty to protect those kids inside that school, right? They're not going to be held accountable to that. And so they didn't do anything, right? It would be different in the United States if all of a sudden, right, if they had a duty to protect the kids and they didn't, they could be held accountable, but they're not. So they didn't have any impetus to go and do anything, right? We also have another case in the United States. It's Deshani versus Winnebago, right? And in this case, right, a child was had a series of beatings from the father, and the county social workers received complaints, and they did not remove the child from the father, right? So this kid was actively being beat from the father, and the child was not being removed. And then they ruled in that case that a state's failure to protect an individual against private violence does not constitute a violation of the Due Process Clause. So even though the state knew and social services knew that this kid was being beat from the father, who the kid was the one who later was the petitioner here, that the state has no duty to stop that from occurring. Just take that in for a second. So if you relate this back to Uvalde, right, they knew that there were people injured, dying on the floor, that have been shot and were continuing to be shot. And the state, again, doesn't have the duty or the requirement, because of the United States, to intervene, to do anything about this. So those officers are still not being held responsible from Deshani v. Winnebago. And then the final case that has something to do with this is the case of Warren v. District of Columbia. And in this case, it's another very similar case in which people, that Carolyn Warren, Miriam Douglas, and Joan, I can't pronounce her name, appealed, suing the District of Columbia and the members of the police force, saying that they had a negligent failure to provide adequate police services during the event that occurred. And the judge, the Supreme Court, said that they don't have that duty. They don't have a duty to provide adequate police services in a situation. That's just a quick summation, but these 3 Supreme Court cases are informing how police handle events, right? We saw in the Parkland shooting where that school resource officer left the building, right, if I'm not mistaken, and he did not intervene within the Parkland shooting, right? He had no legal duty to go and stop the violent event that was happening in Parkland. And we see that now inside of Uvalde, where these dozens, I want to say, police officers went into the building and then didn't do anything for over an hour. Because they don't have a duty in the United States to protect you. That's not their job. They don't have a duty to stop what's happening to you. It's not their job. And that's what the Supreme Court has laid down in those instances. Do we want to discuss that for just a second amongst the 3 of us before we discuss other topics related to Uvalde?
I mean, it gives you a little bit of a different perspective of the statement on the back of every cop car that you see, which is to protect and to serve, doesn't it? I kind of wanted to see what Gavin has to say about this, though, because I know Gavin has been looking very forward to discussing this topic. Take it away, sir.
More of my research was just centered upon like the other systemic failures of Uvalde. So if we want to like talk a little bit more about the Supreme Court decisions first, I'm not the guy to do it because what I really want to talk about is the other systemic failures apart from the police.
Do you have any opinions on about the Supreme Court failures now that you've heard them? That you get emotionally inside you, or something you want to say about it at all?
It just like, I mean, it's kind of hard to say. You just don't feel like your government really super cares for you. Like, one of the things that the United States is, we're about our private property. We fought a big old war 160 years ago about property rights, if you look at it that way. But, our private property, there still needs to be some state interference with our private stuff. Like, we want privacy, we want our private property, but at some point we need to have the state step in and, like, in the case of Gonzalez, like, if there is a restraining order that the state has issued, the state needs to uphold that. But I believe in my cursory research of that Supreme Court decision, they ruled that they didn't have to maintain, like, there's no Colorado state law maintaining that you have to enforce a restraining order, what then is the point of that restraining order? We can go and get a, piece of paper, but if nobody's going to uphold what that piece of paper says, then what's the point of it? It's literally just a piece of paper at that point. Like what Chris says, we're not protected or served. Like, I mean, the cop cars are lying to us now.
That's true.
Yeah, amen to that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Did you want to say something about English? It is late and I can't English. Do you want to say anything else about that topic, Andreas, good sir?
It's just very different than what people say and argue. People always state that, you always have the police to come and protect you in the United States for whatever event occurs. And we saw in Uvalde, and we see with these Supreme Courts, that's not the case, right? And we need to start, at least in the United States, thinking about how do we individually handle what's going on if we know that the police aren't going to be there to protect us. Right, that's something that most Americans don't think about. Is how do you individually handle that? What are you going to do when something happens and the police don't respond? Right. I think there's a saying that says, when seconds matter, police are going to be there in minutes. And in Uvalde, when seconds matter, police were there in over an hour. I think it was like 73 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, like an hour 13.
Yeah. So, we gotta stop thinking that the police are going to be there when we need them the most. And I don't know how you handle that individually in your own life, but I carry. That's just what I do. But I don't know what Chris or Gavin or whoever's listening does. You can't trust the government to be there when you need it. Right? That's what I get from these Supreme Court cases is they're not going to be there when you need them most. And that's what I get. And you should almost take that as a responsibility to protect you and your family, right? If you're going to be in a dangerous place, you almost need to take it as your responsibility to protect your own and yourself if police aren't going to be there for you.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. It's a fantastic point. And we definitely do need to get into that topic of discussion a little bit later on while we're discussing this topic. I do want to mention the police department. So this is something that I wasn't quite clear about, because I know that, like I mentioned earlier, there's the Uvalde Police Department, which is responsible for the entire safety of Uvalde. And then there's the miniature one. I don't remember what it's called specifically. It's like a 5-letter acronym, and they're only responsible for the 8 schools in the district. They're like campus police effectively. And that department as a whole only has 6 officers. So what I'm not still quite sure about is if it was only those 6 officers who showed up initially to the Robb Elementary School, or if it was rather them coupled with Uvalde Police Department in a joint effort and made it a joint failure. Because everything I've seen about who's responsible, it has primarily been in reference to the small district or campus. We'll call them the campus police department because I don't know exactly what their
Yes.
acronym stands for.
So it's actually a little bit, it's like something that the news articles that I've read like to point out is around 200 men defended the Alamo at the beginning of Texas's history, and 349 officers showed up at Uvalde. 349 showed up at Robb
And didn't do
Elementary
squat.
School.
Dang.
They didn't do squat, and it's like it was
Goodness gracious.
I don't know which specific office that you're talking about, but like the majority of these officers were U.S. Border Patrol. It was 149 United States Border Patrol, the 91 Department of Public Safety from Texas, 25 Uvalde Police Department, 16 San Antonio, 16 Uvalde County Sheriff's Office, and then it just keeps getting smaller from there. But there's like 25 different groups listed here. And one of the problems that, like one of the other systemic problems that happened within Uvalde was there was no coordinated, there was no coordinator. What are we doing?
Plan of attack sort of thing.
Yeah, there was no plan of attack. There was a guy that some people thought was in charge, and then other people's had no idea who was in charge. So they were all just they were just standing around, described it like a cluster, like a mob. And like,
it's ridiculous.
What good does mobs do in saving lives? Like I've seen pictures where it's like 10 officers standing around a corner at the school, just watching. And it's
they don't have a duty to protect you, Gavin.
Yeah, you're right. So they're just like, ooh, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity, guys. Let's get our popcorn,
Exactly. It is a little ridiculous.
It is.
I did look it up. I just looked it up now. So Pedro Arredondo was the chief of what's called the Uvalde Consolidated Independent School District Police. And they're the ones who are responsible for the safety of the 8 schools within the district that Uvalde is in. So that's what I was referencing. But dang,
are they resource officers?
Are they? That's a good question. It doesn't sound like they're entirely.
No, they didn't. They don't. And they didn't do anything in Parkland either.
Yeah, they didn't do anything for STEM. Like I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah. We're about to get into that too. But as far as I'm aware, it doesn't seem like they're just resource officers, because it seems like they participate in some sort of training to be able to defend. I don't know. Maybe they are.
Yeah. Hey, but I've been through that stupid, defend training. I went to school and went to Liberty University and worked there. Exactly. And one of the days at the work shift, they had a shooter response training that we went through. And I got trained how to handle an active shooter situation within the school. So, anybody can be trained on how to handle an active shooter situation. And I don't think that extra training from that they received, did anything. But I've got here that the Uvalde police entered the school, this initial entrance here at 11:35. There were 3 Uvalde police officers that went in through one door. One officer was in external armor, and then 4 other officers entered through a different door. So you've got 7 officers that went in at 11:35 a.m. and the shooter entered the school at 11:33. So that's still 2 minutes later. But they still didn't do anything after entering 2 minutes later, those 7 people. So to answer your question earlier, Chris, there were 7 people that initially went in. And if I share my screen here, right, I've got a picture of that time. Let me click the share screen button. Let me click that and click that. And then bring this up here. You see that we've got our timestamp here of 11:36 and 3 seconds here. and you've got police officers in body armor that are entering the school, right? And them not doing anything is really disappointing. And they say this comes from the school camera footage. So that's where that comes from, and that's very disappointing.
Yeah, indeed it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do want to get into Gavin though, because Gavin does have an interesting perspective, a very personal perspective too. Because like you briefly mentioned a second ago, you know from experience how something like this feels. If you want to elaborate on
Yeah.
that a little bit more.
Yeah. So on May 7th, 2019, Alec McKinney and Devin Erickson entered STEM school Highlands Ranch, where I was attending at the time, and opened arms against their classmates, killing one person and wounding 8 others. It's, aside from Columbine, the only other school shooting in United States history to have 2 shooters. I don't know about other mass shootings, but at least in um, school shooting, it's like that. And thankfully, the police response was very rapid in that situation. I think the whole ordeal was over in 10 minutes. I was in the classroom for another hour or so after the events because the police were going through room to room, making sure there were no other shooters. But it seems to me that something has changed between then and now, because even then I was still criticizing some of the officers. There were a lot of officers that showed up on the scene. We were a 5-minute walk from the sheriff department in Douglas County. But like the aforementioned resource officers, I was reading a report. They almost shot an innocent kid that didn't have any arms. Thankfully, they didn't, but like that's how useful they were in this whole engagement. But like with that perspective of like that personal perspective, that's kind of another thing that I kind of want to lean into with Uvalde, because Uvalde it's one of those shootings that's like, it stands out. It's, elementary school kids who died in a replicant of the Sandy Hook shooting. It's got systemic failures on every level. The school locks didn't work. The police weren't doing anything. They weren't required to do anything. None of them knew what they should have been doing in the first place if they wanted to help. But it seems to me like Uvalde is a little bit more of a symptom of something larger within the United States. Because I was doing some research on the shooter just before everything that had happened. He, got fired from 2 jobs, one for sexually harassing an employee, and the other because he refused to talk to any other coworkers, except for one time when he tried to start a conversation about guns. He earned the nickname School Shooter because he was so hateful towards people online and made multiple violent threats. When he actually did go to purchase these weapons, some of the people that he purchased from that were present at the gun store at the time, they're like, yeah, no, he just seemed fine. He just seemed kind of quiet, but others were like, oh, he gave me kind of sketchy vibes, wearing all black and being super quiet isn't a great look for when you're going to buy guns. And like he lied the entire time about he didn't have a license at the time, so his uncle was driving him to this gun store. He was lying to his uncle about where he was actually going. There was a fast food restaurant next door that people really liked in that town. And he was saying, yeah, no, I'm hungry. Let's go there. And then came back with a long, skinny box. And he had gotten into multiple, like, big heated arguments with his parents to the point where he wasn't even able to live with them anymore. He was living with his grandma at the time. But, like, there seems to be so many systemic failures, and it's happening everywhere. And from a personal experience, it's unbelievably awful. I like for after what happened on May 7th in my case, I remember for 3 months afterwards, I just didn't feel any emotion. I felt, other than like scared or fearful. I remember the day before going back into school, I had a nightmare about one of the shooters running down after me personally in the hall. I remember going to a vigil 2 nights after the event where instead of, this was something that needed to happen, but not 2 days after when all the emotions were fresh. The vigil commemorating Kendrick, who died, and all the other students who were injured, was made into a gun control rally. And the students walked out on the entire thing. I myself was one of them. And I remember attending Kendrick's funeral, and he had a Jeep. And I remember standing outside of the church where his funeral was held, and there was an hour-long procession of every single Jeep in Highlands Ranch driving by in honor of him. It's a community-wide impact. Even now, as I talk about it occasionally with my coworkers, I find out that, stepping outside of just Douglas County, just outside of Highlands Ranch, into the broader Denver area, like there's still personal connections that stretch pretty far, and it's just a horrendous thing. But only one person died in STEM, not 21 people, not elementary school children. And it's just speaking on that, there's no greater loss than outliving your child. There's nothing worse in the world that a parent could ever go through. And 19 sets of parents by the end of that day had lost their children, and there was no real response to it. And the only thing they could do was just sit in sorrow. And that is more of what kind of freedom is that?
Yeah, I mean, it is heartbreaking stuff, indeed. I mean, it's an experience no one ever really wishes they even consider occurring to them, right? But that gets into another issue. And this is kind of overall, regardless of what side of the issue you stand on, everyone can agree that school shootings are a bad thing. And we usually want to limit them as much as possible. That said, I am very curious to see what you guys think the reasoning, or rather why such an event happens. Why do people walk into places and just open fire on civilians? Like, why? What do you think is going on in their head, or what causes them? What influences have had an impact in their life to the point where they decide, yeah, this is something I'm going to go do?
So I can speak into a little bit on what happened with the STEM shooters, at least. I've read basically everything about that incident that I can find. And what happened was Maya McKinney, at the time known as Alec McKinney, was a transgender person who was bullied considerably at STEM. They had a hit list of all of the people who had bullied them over the past, year that they were at school. And they were also doing an incredible amount of drugs. They did cocaine twice before they actually went into school on May 7th. And Devin, who was pressured into actually shooting other people, was a social outcast. He had no friends. He didn't have any social life. He was angry all the time and met the wrong person at the wrong time. So it's just like, I won't comment on the gun issue because I don't think that is the reason why these mass shootings happen. They just make them deadlier. I believe that the reason why is the mental health of the people behind them. And going into Uvalde, that was a big red flag that people just seem to ignore on every aspect.
Right. And I think a big thing that's happened is you got, Columbine, right? These people were dejected, I think is the right word, if I know my English, from society that ended up doing the shooting. And it's just been like these fringe outcast type people that have been doing these kinds of things that have felt as outsiders. That doesn't justify them for killing their bullies or whatever, but it appears to be something of a lack of connectedness that we've been doing more and more in our society that are building up and creating this type of people. And then then feeling dejected, and then all of a sudden the MSM, beginning to share them and throw them on all the TVs, almost makes them, like mini celebrities for that short period of time following the shooting. And I think that probably has a huge thing to do with it, right? Last episode we were talking about how I don't believe in censorship, um, and I still don't believe in censorship, but it's their speech that's causing this. So I don't know if it's an ethics thing that media organizations should do in order to not give as much light to the individuals responsible or something. But I think that's a huge factor in what they're doing. And I still believe that the media has all rights to share who did it. But I think that's probably a significant contributing factor to these dejected people wanting to do these shootings.
I think those are
Yeah,
good perspectives.
to actually add on to that, let me see if I have the actual report on here. I don't like the actual Texas House of Representative report. I don't have the exact text messages pulled up listed on it. But one of the things that was really prominent was the night before the incident in Uvalde. The shooter contacted multiple people saying, "Check the news tomorrow."
Yeah,
He was
yeah, I saw
contacted,
that.
like he contacted multiple people in the multiple months prior, and they're like, one person was coming into Uvalde to visit, and they're like, "Hey, I'll be in like in March or like in July," and it's like, "Don't come in July. It'll be too late then. Go, like, you'll see." They want that infamy because it
Yeah.
just based off of that like fringe personality type. They don't fit in. They don't get any recognition. They don't have the love. What they see as attention can be really warped into
Mhm.
like infamy, because infamy
Yep.
still, like, being infamous comes from being famous, and if you're not getting any attention from your parents, if you're not getting any attention from your classmates, if you're not getting any attention from anyone, it's people can fall into a trap where they want to get that attention and they'll do it by any means necessary, and keyword any there.
Yeah. I think that's an important issue to bring up when we're talking about the intentions that most of the people who commit such terrible crimes and why they actually do. It's important to consider the typical reasons why, or the typical reasons that people usually give as to why someone would do such a thing. So, for instance, like a week before was the Buffalo shooting at the grocery store in Buffalo, right? I think.
Mhm. I think so.
Um, that was deemed a racial issue. Why? Because there was evidence that the guy who ended up executing the shooting had a racial agenda. There's no
Mhm.
racial agenda here. Like, Salvador Ramos is Hispanic. Uvalde as a city is a Hispanic majority city. 90% of the students at Robb Elementary were Hispanic. So this is not a racial issue. As it pertains to age, that's another issue that people like to bring up a lot, and it's one of the reasons why people like to promote the idea of raising the age that a person can use a firearm legally to 21. That's a big thing that people promote. This isn't really an age issue, I don't think. There are a lot of 18-year-olds who go out and they go to the range and they enjoy shooting weapons. Solid majority aren't like Salvador Ramos. So what's the actual issue that we're getting at here? It seems like we're dealing with a personal issue. It seems like we're dealing with a person who was very broken, or at least was able to convince themselves that they were broken enough to the point where it didn't matter anymore, where life didn't matter anymore. So the question is, what went into this person thinking that they were broken beyond repair and willing to effectively commit an action that they will never be able to live up if they don't kill themselves? And I believe Salvador died in this incident. Am I correct?
He did, and he also was suicidal before the incident as well.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. So that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the person who's broken. The question is, what went into this broken person? Well, it seems like there are two very, very big contributors to who went, or to the influences that Salvador had that made him the person he was. Obviously, Gavin already touched on the first one. It's the fact that he was bullied substantially. He gained that nickname from his friends. His friends started to tease him and calling him a school shooter, or that he looked like that. Apparently, he gave off that demeanor. It was reported that in middle school or in elementary school, actually, when he was attending this school, that a lot of the people that he knew, all the kids he knew, not all, but a lot of the kids he knew from that school, bullied him for having a speech impediment. So he's had a history of being bullied up to this point in his life. Couple that with the second issue, which is parenting. We cannot understate the impact that parenting has on how kids come out. And it's very apparent from his situation that his family situation is not even just not normal. It was just broken. I think it's fair to define it as broken. It seems like his mother had multiple boyfriends throughout the course of his childhood. One of them even had apparently supposedly molested Salvador in the past, and he reported it to his mom, and his mom apparently ignored Salvador's claim. So this is apparently a kid who's just very broken. He's been very broken. And it got so bad that to the point that I think in my research, I found out that he considered himself like a sociopath. And he actually Googled what the term sociopath meant. And he even looked up options for psychological treatment. So it's very obvious that he's been broken beyond repair to this point. And also his struggles with depression, contributed a lot to it as well. I think the fact that he viewed, or reportedly viewed, a lot of graphic, violent, and sexual content online during this period of life definitely contributed to that side of this person. So these are the things that contribute to this instance. And it's very unfortunate. There are lots of people in the United States who have very similar situations to this, but they haven't taken it as far as Salvador has. So the question is, what can we learn from this instance? How can we go forward and make sure that people who have strugglesome home lives don't end up feeling like there's no purpose to life and end up engaging in action like this?
Well, I think something that we need to consider is that, in our school system right now, things happen in our schools that, would be charged as crimes if they occurred outside of the school. And it just doesn't happen inside the school, right? Like assaults, they get charged if let's say I'm at the bar and I punch somebody at the bar, I get charged with assault, right? If I punch somebody when I was in high school, which I didn't, but I've seen people punch people in high school, right? And get into fights, they don't get charged, right? It's something that's very, very interesting, and we had the whole issue, right, in Loudoun County where a violent sexual act occurred, and that guy didn't immediately get charged, right? He got transferred to a different school, right?
Yeah.
And those kinds of things happen, right? So when bullying happens, people who do violent actions and acts of bullying are not getting charged or reprimanded in logical ways, right? It's allowed to fester, is what I'm saying, because the schools don't really care, right?
Mm.
That's something that I don't think anybody's talking about is the difference between the schools and the real world.
Yeah. I also want to talk a little bit more on like the parent issue, because I feel like
Sure.
I feel like the issue, or like one of the solution, lies there, because just from what I know of, sorry to keep bringing my experiences back into this, but
No worries.
like Maya McKinney, the person who forced the STEM shooting to happen, her dad was in the hospital for like, they're not a hospital, in jail for basically all of her life. And her mom also followed in that same pattern of multiple boyfriends and being an alcoholic. I remember I had a class with Maya McKinney, and I remember looking over at them across the room and thinking that they would, ever like, you would look at someone and think, yeah, they seem cool. I remember thinking that about Maya McKinney. There was no real indicator that she would do that horrible thing. And I think that, like, while there are, like, definitely we should be, prosecuting more in schools, like, for assaults and stuff, that a normal kid just doesn't do that. I kind of feel like there needs to be more change within the parents, like within the way that we parent our youth. And that's something that I don't know how to speak into, honestly.
Well, we don't parent our youth in this country anymore, right? We assign that job to the schools and to daycare. And if you have a church, right, you assign it to your youth pastor, your children's pastor, or whatever, right? Parents don't parent their kids. They don't know what's going on in their kids' lives, right? Both parents are often working, so they're not there till 5 p.m. at night, right? And they do dinner and go to bed. You've assigned the state as the responsibility for your kid, and you're going to get whatever the state's able to do, which is not a lot, right? That the state is not the parent to your kid, and that, I think that's a big thing.
No, 100%. It has to. It has to be, rather. It's also important to note that I think as of this week, if I'm not mistaken, Salvador's mom was actually arrested in Oklahoma City. I don't know. Did you guys hear about that?
No, I didn't.
No. So
I
she
did
actually
not.
was. She was arrested in Oklahoma City on, I believe, earlier in the week. I don't remember exactly when it was, but earlier in the week, she was arrested in Oklahoma City for threatening to kill her boyfriend. And she was released Friday on like $1,000 bond or something like that. But she had a previous history of criminal activity. She was arrested, I believe, a month after the shooting, if I remember correctly, for criminally trespassing and for another warrant that she had out for an invalid or expired driver's license that she hadn't renewed and was driving around with. And she also had a history of drug abuse and misdemeanors for theft and family violence assault. So it just goes to show that not only is parenting important, but it's important that parents like make an attempt to give their kids the best life that they can. Like, at the very least, it's never a good thing for parents to be engaging in activity that compromises their child, either legally or emotionally, right? I think that's something we can agree on. But it just seems like it's so normal in today's society that commitment isn't a thing, and as such, you have all these broken families, or these families that have relationships. Like obviously his mother has several boyfriends, so it doesn't seem like she was ever officially tied or married to one person. So there was no commitment here. These issues end up creeping into the lives of their children. And I think that's something we do need to focus on a little bit more when we're having these conversations about how our children are developing and the people they're becoming, how they deal with the struggles that they have in their lives and in their development. So we don't see these types of events happening as relatively frequently as they do. It seems like there's at least like 2 or 3 mass shootings a year, and a lot of them are young people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
100%.
I definitely agree there. I like the point Andreas made about like coming home, like their parents, send them off to daycare, send them off to school, send them off to, the youth group or at church or whatever. And then come home at 5, make their dinner. Those, like, I don't know about you guys, but like my parents still took it to a little bit of a higher level. I like, even my mom worked from home, but she worked like 12 hours a day. I didn't really ever get to, actually, I don't know what the word is, but like get to talk to her, get to know her. And my dad didn't. He was like, he got home and then went to go do something else. There wasn't much any care there. And that's just, I wonder how we can, as a society, like target those kinds of things. Like, how can we change the way our nation's parents raise their kids, because it seems like, the 9 to 5 workday isn't going to go anywhere. If anything, it looks like it's going the other direction. It looks like it's going to grow a little bit longer. But how do we as a society avoid that kind of scenario from happening? How do we change that? What do you guys think?
Andreas, go for it.
Oh, sure. I think it's the responsibility, right, of men, right? Because this is a male lifestyle podcast, is what Chris originally branded it as, but we're talking about more general things. For both genders, I guess we're starting to discuss, but scripturally, right, we're supposed to be responsible for being the provider, right? So you, whoever's listening, we got to, start providing for our families in a way where, the mother of our kids, can not have to work as much or at all, right? Even though that's what they want. That's what feminism and the modern world teaches, is that you need to be your own boss, your own career drivenness. But we need to start being able to at least provide the opportunity where they don't need to do that, right? Whether that means that you're going to get more responsible and say, I'm not going to go work at McDonald's for $22 an hour, which is crazy now. That's crazy money for McDonald's. But I'm going to do something, right? I'm going to be responsible and put in the work so that, my family's raised by my family and not the state. I think that's something that we got to start doing, and not doing what the easy option is, right? Often we say, okay, I'm going to do, whatever the least is that I can in order to succeed, right? There's a lot of things on the social medias. I don't look at social media too much, but I saw this thing that I didn't understand there, where people are talking about quiet quitting, right? Is that an attitude, right, that you need to do? And is that going to succeed in getting you to a place where you could be that provider you're supposed to be? I don't think it is, right? Being responsible, putting in the hours, putting in the work, and doing what you need to in order to get that promotion, to get that pay increase is what you need to do in order to provide for your family as a man. And if your field is wrong, then you need to switch fields. Even though that might be hard and might be difficult, but we're supposed to do the hard and difficult thing.
Mm-hmm. That's a good perspective, and I think I'm gonna say something similar to what you said, but I'm gonna bring it from a more wide scale approach, and I'm gonna shrink it in to what you're talking about. In society, like I already mentioned, it seems like there's an attack on the nuclear family, as in mother, father, children. This is what we're dealing with in society, and that's what the mainstream way of viewing life is trending in this direction. Obviously, with the rise of feminism and how they've kind of transformed feminism away from what it was initially intending to accomplish, we're starting to see a wide scale acceptance of non-traditional families. So the question is, for us as Christians and as Christian guys, how do we, as changers of the world, as kingdom vessels, how do we get in there to make sure that we can find these kids or these young adults, so that we can help them and to give them hope in life? Since society is not going to do that, since they're not going to be able to, in most cases, escape the situations that they're being bullied in, since they oftentimes can't escape their strugglesome parenting, or their parents' inability to parent them well. And that goes back to what you're talking about, Andreas, with the whole thing of us as guys being the leaders and stepping up in that role and accepting our responsibility to be the primary promoters of this movement within the church, because it starts with us. It starts with us as Christians in the church, and in the church, it starts with the guys, because the guys were given leadership responsibilities by God. All right. It goes back to the fall. That's not something we really talk about frequently. A lot of people will read passages in like the New Testament where it discusses like the headship for guys being, or women or wives needing to submit to their husbands, right? And everyone initially sees that and they say, oh, sexist, Bible's sexist. you can say what you want. God's not saying women are less valuable than men. He's just saying that in order for society to be peaceful, this is the order I've created: Christ, man, woman. That goes back to Genesis. But the point is that we have kind of followed along with society and saying, yeah, I mean, it's fine. It's no big deal. And then we end up seeing dysfunction in the church. And wherever there's dysfunction in the church, there's dysfunction in society. If we're not leading the forefront to getting out to reaching these people who have strugglesome backgrounds. So I think it's super important that we take full ownership as our role, or in our role as guys, rather, to lead that charge against society, even if it means people aren't going to like us for it, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely agree there, because it's just, I feel like if we're going on to like what the church needs to do, I feel like the church needs to expand its services a little bit more, like offer not only like help for the youth that were raised in these families, like I would offer like, or I would suggest like throwing in like a church psychologist in there, like that's like funded by the church and obviously religious, but like just to sit down with kids and help them to understand, or like a therapist at the church, just to, really talk through these things. But also like before that, I feel like there needs to be more of a call to, biblical parenting in the church too, to like enforce that, hey guys, God's calling you to, bring in the money to raise your kids. Moms, love your kids when your dad isn't there, so when he can come back, you all can be one big family again. I feel like there needs to be more calls to that, because I haven't been in the church for much long, but I haven't heard of any of those sermons, period.
Well, it's not comfortable, right?
Yeah.
A lot of our culture is all around, your career first, regardless of your gender. That's what you got to do. And when you say something that's against that, right, you're going to be shunned by people, right? It's not comfortable to say, well, men and women have different roles, and that you as a man need to provide, and you as a woman, you're not so much supposed to do that, right? You can, but, in Psalms 31, right, she did a side business, not Psalms 31, Proverbs 31, she did a side business, basically, is what it talks about, right, if I'm not mistaken.
I think you're right.
But it's not her main driving force, right? But for men it is, and if you're not doing that, right, you're real slacking, and you need to be able to provide, and that's not comfortable. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to think that I have to work hard in order to do the godly thing. And another thing that happens is in America here, we're so materialistic that we can't take a cut of what we have, right? Because we're materialistic. And so we need both incomes in order to get everything we want, which may not be what you're supposed to do. Maybe you take a cut on what you get, right? All the things you purchase, and only are able to get what you can afford based on whatever's best for the family, right?
Yeah, and I also wanted to speak in on that too. I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit earlier. But like taking a step back from the church subject, I feel like to prevent tragedies like Uvalde from continuously happening, I feel like, there's the change within the family life. But I also feel like there needs to be change within, the outside culture. What's happening at the schools, because at least in my schooling experience, and working at fast food while I was in high school, we were just kind of treated as, just another cog in the machine, like at fast food places. Like I had met people like Salvador. They were there for a couple months, were kind of a pain, and then got fired. And then someone else came in to fill in shortly after, about a month after. We're also interchangeable. There's no real like personal development. There's no real personal investment going on anymore. And then also too at school, it's just like growing up in this materialistic culture, there's always that next big thing that someone's fighting for, and that's never going to go away. It's been a thing since before we were born, since before our parents were born, but now it's so ramped up, I
Yeah, you
feel
need the
like.
new iPhone every year.
Yeah, and if
Oh,
you don't have a
exactly.
Mac, are you even can you even learn anything anymore? No. Or like you aren't dressing in the same sort of leggings, really nice sweater as everyone else, or guy who just doesn't care. Like you have to fit in with everyone else. I feel like it's like hyper conformist now, and there's no real sense of, again, personal growth. We're all called to be individuals, individuals together, but I don't feel like that's happening anymore. What do you guys have to say on that?
Like from the perspective of individualism.
Or just like the material culture, like the change outside of not just like the parents, but like the outside culture within the world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that makes it hard. I think it makes it hard that in order to sort of fit into society now, you kind of need to keep up with the material trends that are happening. That does make it a little bit harder, especially for people who live in places like Uvalde. If I'm not mistaken, I believe also from Robb Elementary School, about 81% of the students were economically disadvantaged. So they were on the poor end of the socioeconomic spectrum. They can't afford to keep up with all these materialistic trends, right? So at that point, you really just have to think to yourself, like, how can we include others practically? Like, practically, how can we make others feel loved? And I think that gets into another issue is that our culture likes to redefine terms. It's almost funny because it's like the Bible actually knows what it's talking about. It's funny how that works, isn't it? Yeah.
Wow.
Wow. Funny. So when we see across the Bible people trying to be God, like the God of their own lives, that has huge ramifications across society because now it's just whatever I want is what I pursue. And if I don't feel like interacting with you, the weird kid who dresses in all black and is just weird and sits in the corner, so be it. I won't do it. I won't do it. And that's where the problem is because as people, we are built for community. We're built to rely on each other to discuss life, to discuss issues. So when we are out in the world not doing that, especially with people who need it the most, the people who are disadvantaged, we're just not helping society. And we're saying on the outside, just keep up with us. No, it's not the job of the poor to keep up with the rich and the more privileged. It's the job of the privileged to sacrifice for the poor. And it's actually, it goes to something. It's interesting. I've always found this interesting. Of all the four gospel accounts, Luke, if I'm not mistaken, is the only gospel writer who notes Jesus saying that to whom much is given, much is required. And Luke was a medical doctor, so he was seen widely in society as someone who would have been quote unquote an expert in society, just at an objective like societal level. Like this person helps society practically. It's funny that he of all people notes that because he was by worldly standards the most educated of all the disciples, and he's the one that noted to whom much is given, much is required. We need to just take the same approach in our own lives, and I think if everyone takes just that approach, like I'm not here for me. I'm here for him because his life matters as much as mine. That can have huge ramifications on society. Like honestly, it's not even that hard to do. Like just take a little bit of time out of your day, make somebody else feel loved. Whether you feel like you're doing it for God or you're doing it for yourself, trust me, it doesn't matter who you're doing it for. When you do it, you feel better. Just do it. And that will contribute to a whole bunch of change behind the scenes in the lives of people like Salvador that you won't ever even know, or you might not ever even know.
And I feel like just like a practical, like just from a practical standpoint, like emphasis on that word little, take a little time. Say hi to your fast food workers at the grocery store. Like smile, talk to the clerk. If you see someone else in the aisle with you, like you guys are both looking at the same type of cereal, talk about it. Just make a little bit of friendly conversation with someone. Even if it's little, seeing someone else smile there's just something biologically pleasing about that. It just it makes us smile back. We're wired to that. And I feel like that's a good first step we can take. Just take a little bit of time out of your day, just a little bit. Tell your grandma you love her. Text your parents, I love you. Like, don't cut off the person in traffic. You're not in such a rush. Just go out of your way to make someone else's day just a little bit better. It can like make it like a daily requirement. I made at least one person's day better. You know?
It's all it takes. It's really all it takes. Just make an effort. Guys, I don't know if you know this. It's free to be nice. It's free to be a pain. It's free to love people. It's free to bully people. This one, loving people, typically has a better impact on society, just in general. Just
Crazy
do
how
that.
that
Put the
works.
effort into doing that. It's not hard.
That's like the example that comes to mind is like you're at the grocery store. Are you gonna leave your shopping cart out in the middle of the parking lot? Or are you gonna go put it back? Both are free. Both are effortless. Which one are you going to do? Because I know I've pulled up to Walmart and there's been a perfect parking spot taken up by a shopping cart or a shopping cart behind me, and it just ruins my day. But just pushing that out of the way, it makes me happy because I know that someone else isn't gonna have to deal with that. You know. And it's free, doesn't cost anything, and it makes you feel really good.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying, man. All right. Well, in conclusion, how can we respond? What are the biggest takeaways we get from this whole situation as a whole?
I think we laid out a few at the beginning, right?
Mhm.
You know, you can't trust the police to be there for you, right? And that we need to, really work on ourselves and do what the Bible's called us to do to support our families and try to be a little bit nice to somebody for no apparent reason, right? A random act of kindness, right, is something that we should do.
Exactly. Gavin, any thoughts?
I agree on that. Let's just do that random act of kindness. Just step out of your comfort zone and make someone else smile. And
Exactly.
then who knows, maybe someday they'll give it back to you. And care for your kids.
Care
Yes.
for your kids.
First and foremost. Love them with everything.
Yes. I'm going to echo that with you two 100%. Strive to be good parents. Just do it. Parents, if you're an actual parent right now, strive to be a good parent. If you want to be a parent in the future, learn how to be a good parent. Learn how to raise your kid well so they don't end up needing to resort to such things. We also learned, I guess, that bullying is usually not a good thing. Usually doesn't end in anything good. I think we can take that away. Yeah, I think that's fair. But just see the beauty in others. I mean, everybody's made in the image of God, regardless of where you are in life. We're all beautiful in his eyes, just by default being human. That doesn't mean we're perfect. We're obviously broken, but we're made in his image. So we all have beauty in some regard. Make a choice to recognize the beauty in others and let them know. Let them know, hey, is there anything I can do for you? Can I help you in any way? Can I pray for you in any way? Just make an attempt to love on others and just be a vessel for God through just reading his word and understanding how he needs you to love your neighbor, right? Effectively. Any other comments, guys?
Yeah. If you liked what you heard today in either one of our two podcasts, you should like, subscribe, and share so that we can expand this conversation to more people as we go through future conversations. We'll be back next week with 2 new episodes. That's all I've got to say. I think we're talking Dobbs. I don't know what we're talking about our current event, but those are the 2 things. Chris.
Good stuff, sir. I echo entirely what he just said right there. If you like what you've heard, you might as well just come back later. Later being next week. So hopefully you guys are enjoying what you're hearing here. Hopefully you're sharing it with your friends and your family or anybody else.
Gavin, do you have anything to say?
I got nothing. You guys said it all.
Okay.
Dang. There you
Have
go.
a good week, everybody.
Adios.
Have a good week.
Yeah, nothing
Peace,
much
peace.
else to say. Peace out, y'all. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the A to G Lifestyle Podcast and or A to G Lifestyle TV. Until next Saturday, peace out, y'all. Have a great rest of your week. We'll see you then. Peace.